all. So we're looking at Phil Vischer and his Holy Post podcast. Phil Vischer, of course, is of Veggietales fame. I believe he's the voice of the cucumber, and he's the creator of Veggietales. And he's created something called the Holy Post, which is basically a leftist talking point podcast platform within the auspices of Christianity. And for the life of me, I don't know why he's even doing this podcast while still maintaining his Christianity, even if he does, and maintaining that he believes in the Bible, when all he seems to really want to do is to kind of mimic liberal theology. Now, that may not be a fair critique, but I'm going to dig into that here in just a moment, and hopefully it will make a little bit more sense. But needless to say, Phil Vischer takes on John Cooper of Skillet fame in a recent post, and then John Cooper responded to him, and I think what Vischer has to say and Cooper's response to that is incredibly important, so I wanted to talk about it here today. So let's jump in really quick into Vischer's comments about John Cooper and what John Cooper is saying about deconstruction.
So I wanted to talk just for a bit about deconstruction because, the band Skillet. I like the band Skillet. I actually like their music. The lead singer, John Cooper, is kind of interesting because when you start actually listening to the lyrics of it, very, very kind of hard rock, screamy, but fun music. But he kind of likes to be at war. That's a theme through a lot of Skillet's music, is that we're under attack, we're not giving up, we're not backing down. So it's like 90s youth group music. It's like the natural evolution of Carmen, where the world is out to get us kids. So put on the full armor of God, because we're fighting back.
Let me just say, I love mocking. I think mocking has a place. I believe that comedy is a tool that can help you learn. And if something deserves to be mocked, it should be mocked. But for God's sake, for the love of everything holy, if you're going to mock somebody, do it with a mirror. Do it with a little, self-awareness. So we're talking about Skillet, a rock band that's streaming billions in a single year, and Phil Vischer, who's the most socially irrelevant Christian probably on the planet, who created Veggietales. So if Skillet, not that it's even a bad thing to be a 90s youth rock band, if they were a 90s youth rock band, you're a washed up 90s cartoon creator. So where they get off mocking Skillet, I will never know in a million years. But these brain children want to continue and try to tell us why it's so funny that John Cooper would stand up for biblical truths and stand against the deconstruction movement. So they'll go on to say great, brilliant things like this.
And this time, he said, "It is time that we declare war against this deconstruction Christian movement." He's declaring war against deconstruction. He says, "I don't even like calling it deconstruction Christian. There's nothing Christian about it. It is a false religion."
So who's calling it a religion?
What is he even talking about?
So he's friends with, hang on.
Okay, I wanted to stop right there real quick just to say this. Now, they're making fun of Cooper, and they'll make fun of Elisa Childers a little bit more. And they're doing so because they called deconstruction another religion, all right? And they're saying they're not even defining their terms and what deconstruction is. And deconstruction isn't another religion. It's just people who are kind of exploring their faith and trying to reanalyze their faith. And here's the problem. They'll also, on the other hand, say, but deconstruction is so big and so wide that it's hard to define and you can't really pin it down. Essentially, this is what they'll say. So on the one hand, they're crying out for nuance and defining of terms, but then they're also saying, but you can't really define the terms. And here's the real problem at the end of the day. They themselves are exposing their own ignorance over at the Holy Post because they don't know that deconstruction is actually another religion. Because the decoupling that they're going to talk about here in just a moment is something vastly different than what deconstruction is, because deconstruction is a very specific thing. But I want you to hear from them kind of their back and forth and their banter about deconstruction so that we can get to that. So here's a little bit more.
Yeah, I just think it's an overreaction.
I think it's an unhealthy term.
Well,
it didn't start that way.
Well,
you think deconstruction is an unhealthy term?
Yeah, because it just sounds like you're taking a wrecking ball to your faith. Kind of uncritically destroying. I'm so mad about my upbringing that I'm throwing everything away, and then I'll see what I want to bring back in.
So is disentangling or unbundling a better, less violent
I
word?
like re-examining my inherited tradition. That's what I prefer.
So they themselves are struggling to define this thing called deconstruction. Some of them say you should call it decoupling, and some of them say you should call it this and that. And then Phil Vischer, like with this eureka moment, says, I don't think the term is helpful. Here's why the term's not helpful. Not only because deconstruction sounds like you're destroying something, but because deconstruction actually has historical roots and is something specifically. It's not decoupling. All right, so let's, first things first, decoupling your faith. What they mean is actually, there's another word for it that's actually more straightforward, critical thinking. And by the way, decoupling should be taking place for every Christian in all the world, no matter where you are. Decoupling, as it were, your kind of cultural understanding of Christianity, or the things that your church passed down to you, or that your parents or grandparents or friends passed down to you that aren't actually scriptural doctrines of the church. Those kind of things should constantly be pushed to one side, and we should understand tradition apart from true biblical doctrine. Now that's something, again, hopefully all Christians are journeying on, but that's not deconstruction. See, deconstruction is something vastly different than that. Deconstruction has historical roots in Marxism. So I know when people hear this, especially Christians on the far progressive left, say, oh, the Marxists again, huh? But this is the problem. Is that when you don't understand terms, you should probably shut up about them. Okay, so deconstruction comes from Jacques Derrida specifically, who himself was steeped in Marxist ideology along with Foucault, and who taught that words essentially are something that support the patriarchy and support normative society, and that if you're ever going to truly create social reform, and why do we want social reform? Of course, because we're Marxists. So if you're ever going to create social reform, what you have to do is you have to use language, and you have to undermine its meaning, and you have to flip it on its head, and you have to use language against those who would use it to insist upon a hierarchical structure or a normative structure, as it were. And so Jacques Derrida was famous for language games and trying to use language to try to obscure truth, because these guys essentially believed that you should use whatever tool is within your tool belt to be able to destroy society and its norms, and then from the ashes recreate something within the image of a Marxist utopia. And so this is why when you use the word deconstruction, you get the flack you deserve. And it is why it is another religion, because deconstruction is not the course of biblical Christians. We are not in the habit of trying to undermine societal power. We are in the habit of trying to rightly divide the word of God. That's a Christian endeavor. Deconstruction in its truest and most historical roots is not anything that is a Christian endeavor. Not to mention the fact that it is Marxist in nature. And ultimately, what you will find yourself doing is deconstruction will lead you to progressive or liberal Christianity and therefore, you have another religion. This is well documented in Christianity and Liberalism, the book by John Gresham Machen, who, by the way, is a Princeton scholar, who is famous among theologians for being one of the greatest premier Greek scholars the world has ever known. And if you went to seminary, or you went to master's degree program, or you studied Greek in school, you probably know who Machen is because he has a famous book that was designed to help people parse Greek words and to learn the Greek language. So he's an absolute scholar, absolute brilliant man. And in his book, Christianity and Liberalism, he outlines the difficulties and the errors and the other religion of liberal Christianity. So it is another religion. And what Alisa Childers and what John Cooper are trying to say is that ultimately deconstruction, when it's done as it is supposed to be done, will eventually lead you, and does very often lead you, more often than not, to progressivism and to liberal Christianity, more so than an orthodox biblical understanding of Christianity. And they're feigning ignorance here, which brings us to the last point. Why feign ignorance? Well, there's two reasons. Either you truly are ignorant, or you're using your ignorance as a tool to be manipulative. You can catch brand new episodes of Indie Thinker with Reed Huberman every Monday, and weekly bonus episodes to keep you thinking throughout the week. But you have to subscribe and click the bell to be notified when new episodes drop. If you enjoy this content, make sure to like this video and share it with friends.